He pulled a drowning woman from a car hanging over a cliff, a woman whose company had just signed the order to destroy his town. He didn't know who she was. Not yet. But she knew exactly what she was doing when she looked at the man who saved her life and said nothing. What happens next will make you question everything you think you know about power, kindness, and the people we write off too soon. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The call came in at 11:47. Not a real call, no dispatcher, no emergency line. Just the sound Joel Carver's gut made when he saw the guardrail. Bent. Broken. Wrong. How was doing 60 on Route 9 along the Maine coastline, heading home after a double shift at the Rockport Naval Shipyard, wipers slamming hard against a storm that had been beating the peninsula since sundown. His hands were cracked from cold metal and hydraulic fluid, his knuckles split where a wrench had slipped 3 hours before. He hadn't eaten since noon. His daughter had school in the morning. He was already calculating whether there was enough milk in the fridge. And then he saw it. The guardrail at Halcott's Bend. The stretch locals called Dead Man's Curve, not poetically but accurately, was gone. Not bent. Gone. A section of it ripped clean out of the frozen earth, leaving a dark, ragged gap above the water. Below that gap, 60 feet down the Atlantic Ocean, black and furious in January. Joel slowed. Told himself it was probably a deer strike. Maybe an old truck. Maybe it happened hours ago and someone already called it in. He almost kept going. Almost. Then he saw the taillights. Red. Faint. Flickering like something trying to stay alive. He stopped the truck. "Don't be stupid," he said out loud to no one. He said it the way men his age say things they've already decided against. Like speaking the warning is enough to honor it before you ignore it anyway. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box, pulled his collar up, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him sideways, and immediately. January on the Maine coast isn't cold. Cold is a word for weather that waits for you to adapt. This was assault. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your jacket, seeps into the bones behind your ears, makes your eyes water, and then freezes the tears before they reach your jaw. Joel had survived 2 deployments in conditions that would hospitalize most men. He put his head down and walked toward the gap. The SUV was there. A big one. Black. Expensive looking, even crumpled, which told him something. The front end had caught on a ledge of rock, maybe 8 feet below the roadbed. A ledge that had no business holding that much weight, and knew it. The rear wheels were still on the road surface barely. The vehicle was tilted at a 20-degree angle over the water nose, down one wrong shift of weight from going over completely. Joel lay flat on the frozen road, hung his flashlight beam down. Driver's side window. Cracked. A woman inside. She was alive. He could see her moving, not thrashing, not the panicked movement of someone who hadn't processed what happened. She was moving deliberately. Trying the door. Realizing the door wouldn't open. Trying it again. The calm of someone who'd trained herself not to lose control, even when losing control would be justified. "Hey!" Joel shouted it into the wind. "Hey, can you hear me?" She turned her face up toward the light. He couldn't make out much. Pale. Dark hair. Blood above one eyebrow. She said something, but the storm ate it. "Don't move," he called down. "Don't shift your weight. I'm going to get you. Just stay still." He got up, went back to his truck, and thought fast. He had tow rope. He always had tow rope. 15 years working on Navy vessels teaches you that the moment you don't have it is the moment you need it. He had jumper cables that were useless here. He had a heavy-duty flashlight, work gloves, and a come-along ratchet strap he used for hauling equipment. He had a trauma kit under the seat, basic, but real, because 3 years ago, his wife had needed a tourniquet in a parking lot, and he'd had nothing, and he'd sworn he'd never be unprepared again. He didn't let himself think about Claire. Not tonight. He tied the tow rope to his truck's rear hitch, made 3 wraps, checked the knot. The way they'd taught him in the Navy, not hoping it held, knowing it held. He looped the other end around his waist and threw the D-ring on his work belt. Then he lowered himself over the edge. The ledge wasn't stable. He felt it shift under the SUV's weight when he made contact with it, a deep grinding movement that turned his stomach. The vehicle groaned an actual sound metal against rock, like something in pain. He moved around to the driver's side, braced himself, and put his face against the cracked window. She was younger than he'd expected. 30, maybe 32. Even banged up and terrified, and she was terrified. He could see it now, that the mask she'd had on a moment ago had slipped. She had a quality to her that Joel recognized without being able to name it. The quality of someone accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room she was in. "I'm going to open this door," Joel said, loud and slow, projecting through the glass. "When I do, you do exactly what I tell you, nothing else. You understand?" She nodded once. Precise. Like she was taking an order in a meeting. The door was jammed, impact damage, frame bent slightly. Joel worked the handle twice, then positioned himself and pulled with everything he had, the rope around his waist, the only thing keeping him from going down with it. The door came open with a sound like a gunshot. The vehicle shifted. The woman made a sound, not a scream, something quieter, more controlled. A sharp inhale. The SUV slid 3 inches forward on the ledge, and both of them froze. "Look at me," Joel said. She looked at him. "What's your name?" "Cora," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Cora Sterling." "Cora, I'm Joel. I need you to not think about what's underneath us right now, and I need you to give me your left hand. Just the left hand. Slow." She unbuckled her seatbelt, which Joel respected, even as it terrified him, because it was the right call, and she knew it, and extended her left arm. He gripped her wrist the way you grip someone you are not going to drop. His cracked knuckles split further on contact with the cold. He didn't notice. "Now slide toward me. Slow. Hips first. Keep your weight low. The bag. Leave it. There's a hard drive in." "Cora!" He said her name the way he used to say it in the service when a young sailor was about to make a decision that would get someone killed. "Leave the bag." She left the bag. She moved exactly as he told her, with a physical precision that surprised him. No wasted motion, no panic spiraling into chaos. When she got close enough, Joel shifted his grip to both wrists, planted his feet on the ledge, and pulled. For 1 second, that lasted approximately forever. The SUV groaned, tilted, and the ledge cracked beneath it. Then Joel had her on the road. They both hit the frozen asphalt hard, Joel taking the impact on his shoulder so she didn't. He heard something pop in his arm. Didn't stop moving. Got them both to their feet and 20 feet back from the edge before he let himself breathe. The SUV went over 90 seconds later. They heard it, a long, tearing sound, then silence, then a crash that the storm swallowed immediately. Neither of them looked. Joel had his hands on Cora's arms, checking her pupils. Color the gash above her eyebrow that was bleeding steadily, but not arterially, the way she was holding her left shoulder. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." "You sure your shoulder?" I said yes. Then a half beat later, "I'm sure, yes, thank you." She said it the way someone says thank you when they mean it, but aren't used to needing to. Joel got her into the truck. He cranked the heat past her, the trauma kit, watched her press gauze to her own forehead, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who'd handled worse, or was doing an excellent job pretending she had. He pulled out his phone to call 911. No signal. He stared at the screen. Tried twice more. Nothing. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. It happened out here every bad winter, and this was a bad winter. "I'll drive you to the hospital in Rockland," he said. "Route 9 South is flooded," Cora said. She said it immediately, like she'd already run the logistics. "I came from that direction. There's a section just past the Meridian exit that was already crossing the road when I went through 20 minutes ago. By now, Route 1 North. The bridge on Route 1 loses its shoulder in high wind. In this?" She glanced at the storm through this windshield. "I wouldn't chance it." Joel looked at her. "You're not from here." "No." "You know the roads." "I do my research before I travel." She paused. "It's a habit." He put the truck in gear anyway and tried Route 9 South because he needed to see for himself. 3 miles in the road was underwater, not flooded, not passable, if you go slow. Gone. A section of asphalt submerged under 2 feet of black moving water, the edge invisible. He sat there with the engine idling. "There's a Navy weather station," he said finally. "About 4 miles back east. Old facility. Decommissioned. But the building's solid government-built 18-inch concrete walls. There's an emergency shelter protocol, emergency supplies. I've been there before." Cora didn't say anything for a moment. Joel could feel her processing it, the variables, the risks, the alternatives. The same way he'd watched junior officers calculate their options when no good option existed. "How long could we be stuck there?" she asked. "Storm's supposed to break day after tomorrow at the earliest. Could be 3 days." Silence. "Is there anyone expecting you?" she asked. That one hit him somewhere unexpected. "My daughter," he said. "She's with my neighbor. She's fine." He said it the way he said everything about Ellie, with total certainty and an undercurrent of constant low-level worry that never fully left him. Cora looked out the window. No one who'd noticed before morning. She said it simply, like a weather report. Like it was just a fact about herself she'd long since stopped finding strange. But something in it, the particular quietness of it, made Joel not respond right away. He turned the truck around and drove toward the weather station. They didn't talk much on the way. The storm was loud enough to excuse the silence. When they pulled up to the station, a squat, ugly block of a building that had been watching over this coastline since 1968, Joel had the emergency lock code from memory. 6 years ago, he'd been part of a Navy maintenance crew that had prepped the building for decommission. He remembered the override sequence the way he remembered everything practical, absolutely, and without sentiment. Inside was cold, but dry. Emergency lighting kicked on from battery backup. There were cots, MREs, a first aid kit larger than anything in Joel's truck, 2 wool blankets per cot, and a hand-crank radio that picked up nothing but static. Cora stood in the middle of the room and looked around with an expression Joel couldn't quite classify. Not disgust, not dismay. Something more like recalibration. "I've stayed in worse hotels," she said. Joel almost laughed. Didn't quite. He got the portable propane heater going, checked the carbon monoxide vent, distributed the blankets. He found an emergency contact form on a wall clipboard from 2019 and used the back of it to write a note. His truck's plate number, his name, the station's location, which he taped to the inside of the door. If a rescue team came looking, they'd find it. Then he sat down on a cot across from Cora. Sterling looked at the woman his town blamed for half its problems and asked, "You hungry?" She blinked, like hunger was a question she'd forgotten to consider. "Yes," she said, like it surprised her. "MREs aren't great, but they're hot." He stood. "Beef stew or chicken and rice?" "Beef stew." "Then, please." He heated 2 of them on the propane burner, handed her one and sat back down. Outside, the storm hammered the 18-inch concrete walls and found nothing it could move. Cora ate 3 bites before she said quietly, without looking up, "You knew who I was, didn't you? When you came down off the road?" It wasn't quite a question. Joel looked at her across the small space between the cots. He had a habit one Claire used to call his Navy face of going very still when he was deciding something important. "I didn't know your name," he said. "I knew your car was worth more than my house." Cora absorbed that. "And you still came down?" "Yeah." "Why?" He picked up his fork. "Because you were there." She watched him eat for a moment. Something moved across her face, not soft exactly. More like something that had been locked down for a long time, encountering a door it hadn't expected to find. "That's not an answer most people would give," she said. "It's the only one I've got." Outside, the ocean threw itself against the rocks in the dark, and the storm settled in around them like it intended to stay a while. And Joel Carver, who had survived 2 wars and 1 grief and 1,000 quiet nights alone, sat across from Cora Sterling, the woman his town called the enemy, and felt for the first time in 3 years like the night was not entirely against him. Drop your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. Part 2 is where everything starts to crack open. The first night was the worst, not because of the storm. though the storm was bad wind hitting the concrete walls in rhythmic assault like something that wanted in, but because of the silence between them. The specific kind of silence that forms when two people are close enough to touch and have absolutely nothing in common except the walls keeping them alive. Joel slept in 4-hour intervals, the way the Navy had trained him. He woke at 3, checked the heater's fuel level, checked the CO vent, checked the temperature. Cora was awake when he looked over. She was sitting upright on her cot with the blanket around her shoulders, staring at the far wall, in the way people stare when they're not looking at anything in front of them. "You should sleep," he said. "I know. But you're not going to." "Not yet." He sat on the edge of his cot. Outside, a tree branch probably hit the building once and didn't come back. "You hurt anywhere I didn't check ribs, hips." "I'm fine. I'm asking because I have a kit, not because I'm making conversation." She turned and looked at him directly for the first time since they'd eaten. In the low orange light of the battery lantern, the gash above her eyebrow had dried to a dark line. The bruise was coming in around it, spreading. "My left shoulder is sore. I hit it on the door frame when the car went sideways. It's not dislocated. I know what that feels like." "You've dislocated a shoulder before. Rock climbing. I was 24. It was the last time I did something just for the experience of doing it." She said it without self-pity, but there was something underneath the words, a small buried thing that Joel heard without acknowledging it. "I can wrap it if you want. Give it some compression." "I said I'm fine." "You did." He lay back down. "Offer stands." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long have you been at the shipyard?" He didn't answer immediately, and she registered it, the pause, the decision about how much to give. 6 years, he said finally. "Came back to Maine after my second deployment. My wife was here, her family. Ellie was born here." He stopped. Started again differently. "It made sense to stay." "Was." Cora's voice was neutral, not probing, just precise. "Yeah." Another silence. This one different from the earlier ones, less defensive. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was 3 years ago. That doesn't change what I said." Joel looked at the ceiling. "No, I guess it doesn't." He closed his eyes. "Go to sleep, Ms. Sterling." A long pause. "Cora," she said. He opened one eye. "You pulled me off a cliff. I think we're past formality." She lay down, pulling the blanket up. "Go to sleep, Joel." He almost smiled. Almost. By the second morning, they had established a rhythm without discussing it. Joel handled the practical fuel levels, food inventory, water from the emergency supply. Cora, with nothing else to do, and apparently constitutionally incapable of idleness, found a maintenance log from 2017 and spent 2 hours reading it with the focused attention of someone reviewing a quarterly report. When Joel pointed out it was a record of HVAC repairs and weather gauge calibrations, she said, "Infrastructure tells you everything about how an organization thinks," and went back to reading. He started to say something dismissive and stopped himself. Because she wasn't wrong. By noon, the storm hadn't broken. The hand-crank radio found a weather broadcast through the static. The system had stalled offshore, moving slower than predicted. Earliest clearing now 72 hours. Joel called his neighbor Helen on the satellite emergency communicator he'd found in a locked cabinet, military grade, still functional, and got through on the 3rd try. Ellie was fine. She'd cried when she woke up, and he wasn't there, Helen said, but had then eaten 2 bowls of cereal and was currently very interested in Helen's cat's feelings about the storm. He kept his voice level the whole call. When he clicked off, he set the communicator down on the table and pressed his palms flat against the surface and breathed. He didn't know Cora had been watching until she said, "How old? 7." He straightened up. "She's fine." "You weren't worried about that?" He looked at her. "What? You weren't worried she was in danger. You were worried she was scared." Cora tilted her head slightly. "There's a difference. Most people would lead with the safety question. You already knew she was safe. You'd left her with someone you trusted. What you needed to know was whether she cried." Joel stared at her. "She did," Cora said. "Didn't she?" "For a little while." And now you're going to carry that for the rest of the day. It was not a comforting thing to say. It was just accurate, and he found unexpectedly that accurate was better. Yeah, he said. Probably. Cora nodded once and went back to the maintenance log. Joel stood there for another second, feeling strangely steadied, and went to check the heater fuel. The conversation that broke them open happened on the second night, and it started of all places with the MRE crackers. They were eating chicken and rice for Joel, beef stew again for Cora, who had expressed a decisive preference, and Joel had opened a side packet of crackers and put them between them on the floor without thinking about it. The automatic economy of men who've shared field rations for years. Cora took one without comment, and something about the casualness of it. The total absence of awkwardness made Joel say, before he'd decided to, "You've eaten like this before." Like what? On the floor, out of a packet, without a table, she chewed. My father believed in what he called foundation experiences. Before any of us were allowed to work in the company, we spent a year doing something hard. Manual labor. Military adjacent. Something that would cost you something. A pause. I spent a year on a cargo logistics crew, Pacific routes. It was not glamorous. Your father runs Sterling Dynamics. Ran. She corrected it the same way he'd corrected her about Claire. Clean and immediate. He died 4 years ago. I took over at 27. She looked at the cracker in her hand. The board expected me to fail within 18 months. How'd that go for them? Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. I tripled revenue in the first 3 years. Expanded the defense contract portfolio by 40%. Opened 2 new facilities. The almost smile faded. They stopped predicting failure after that. They just started working around me instead. Joel looked at her. What does that mean? It means that being competent as a woman in that position doesn't actually earn you authority. It earns you resentment dressed up as respect. She said it flatly, like something she'd processed long ago and had no interest in performing emotion about. The board tolerates my results. They don't take my decisions. Like what decisions? She looked at him, held it a beat. Then, there's a facilities review underway, for the Rockport shipyard. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in Joel's chest dropped to floor. I know, he said. His voice came out even. He'd had 6 years to practice keeping his voice even when it mattered. The whole town knows. Sterling Dynamics is buying out the contract, restructuring. That's what the press release says. Is it wrong? Cora set down her food. She seemed to be deciding something. It's incomplete. What does incomplete mean for the 300 families who depend on that yard? She didn't flinch from it. It means I've been in a 6-month fight with my own board over that facility. There are 2 proposals on the table. One closes the yard, moves the contract to a consolidated facility in Virginia. The other restructures in place, modernizes the operation, transitions some roles, but keeps the facility running and the majority of jobs intact. Which one does the board want? The Virginia option saves 12% more in overhead. So the board wants to close it? Yes. And what do you want? The question sat there. Cora looked at him for a long moment, and Joel had the same sense he got sometimes with young enlisted men, who'd been told what they thought for so long, they'd forgotten they were allowed to have an opinion that she wasn't used to being asked. What I want, she said, is not a simple answer. Try anyway. She folded her hands in her lap. A controlled gesture. I've run the numbers 40 different ways. The Virginia consolidation is economically efficient. On paper, it is the correct decision. She paused. But I've also read the workforce analysis. 61% of the Rockport Yard's employees are veterans or active reserve. 38% are sole income earners in their households. The economic disruption of closure wouldn't just cost jobs. It would accelerate the decline of an entire community that is already struggling. She stopped, started again. And I am aware that I am telling this to a man who works at that facility. So you should know that I know what it sounds like when I say I'm trying to stop it. Joel set down his fork. Are you, he said, Trying to stop it. Yes. Why? She looked at him like it was a strange question. Because closing it is wrong. He studied her face, looking for the angle, the calculation, the thing behind the thing. Because in his experience, people who ran billion-dollar companies did not make decisions because something was wrong. They made decisions because something was profitable, or litigious, or bad for the brand. And then they built the moral language around it after. He didn't find it. The angle, the calculation. He found something that looked uncomfortably surprisingly like conviction. The board is meeting in 3 weeks, Cora said. I have a counter-proposal ready. I've been building the case for 6 months. Whether it passes depends on 3 votes I don't have yet. And if it doesn't pass, then I've failed. She said it simply. No performance. And 300 families pay the price for it. She picked her food back up. That's what I think about. If it's useful for you to know that. Joel didn't say anything for a long time. Outside, the storm kept working on the walls and finding nothing it could break. Why are you in Maine? He said finally. Right now, in a storm, on Route 9 at midnight. Cora looked at the floor. I wanted to see it. The yard, the town, the harbor, the place. A pause. Before the meeting, I wanted to walk around without anyone knowing who I was and just see what it actually was. Not the report, not the workforce analysis, not the economic impact study. She looked up at him. The actual place. Joel absorbed that for a long moment. Did you get to see it? He said. I got as far as the harbor road before the storm hit. Something flickered in her expression. Maybe frustration, maybe something less defined. So, no. He sat with that. And then, without planning to, he started talking. He talked about the yard. The way you talk about a place when it's not an economic unit to you, but a location where your life happened. He told her about the first winter he'd worked there when he'd shown up not knowing anyone, and an old machinist named Dale had handed him coffee without being asked, and spent the lunch hour explaining every personality in the break room like he was briefing a new arrival on foreign territory. He told her about the time a Navy vessel came in with an engine fault that none of the younger mechanics could trace. And he'd found it in 40 minutes, and the look on the crew's faces, that look that military people give when they realize you speak the same language. He told her about Ellie's first day of school, when he'd dropped her off and driven to the yard, because he needed somewhere to put the adrenaline of her growing up, and how Dale had taken one look at him and said, "First day," and he'd said, "Yeah," and Dale had said, "She'll be fine. You're the one who won't be," and poured him coffee again. Joel didn't tell stories as a rule. He didn't know why he was telling this one. Cora listened the way very few people listened completely. Not waiting for her turn. Not filing it under a category. Just taking it in with the same attention she'd given the maintenance log, the same attention she'd given the satellite communicator when he'd called Helen. Like she understood that what he was saying was data of a kind she didn't have and needed. Dale's on the layoff short list, Joel said when he'd run out of story. If the yard restructures, he's 63. He won't find another position. Cora said nothing. I'm not telling you that to pressure you. I know you're not. I'm telling you because you said you wanted to see the actual place. He looked at her steadily. That's part of it. She held his gaze. I know. Her voice had gone quiet, not soft, but stripped of the professional register she'd been carrying. Underneath it was something that sounded like the voice of someone sitting with something they couldn't solve yet. I know. They didn't talk much after that. Not because they'd run out of things to say. Joel had the strange sense they were barely started, but because some conversations need room around them to settle. He woke at 3 again, ran his checks. Fuel good. Vents clear. Temperature holding. Cora was asleep this time, lying on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, the careful composure of the waking hours completely gone. She looked younger. She looked, Joel thought, like someone who had been running hard for a very long time and had temporarily forgotten to. He stood there for 1 second longer than was strictly necessary. Then he went back to his cot and closed his eyes, and lay there thinking about how a man could spend 6 years being angry at a company and then spend 2 days in a concrete box with the woman who ran it and find that none of the anger had the same shape anymore. It wasn't gone. He didn't trust her fully, that would be stupid, and Joel was not a stupid man. 3 weeks stood between the boardroom and Dale's retirement. Words in an emergency shelter were not votes. But she'd left the bag. He kept coming back to that. When the car was going over and every second counted, and he'd told her to leave the bag with the hard drive in it, she'd argued for exactly 1 sentence and then left it. No second negotiation. She'd made the calculation instantly. The hard drive was valuable. Her life was more valuable. The man telling her to leave it knew what he was talking about. She trusted his judgment when it counted. He didn't know what to do with that yet. Outside, the storm was finally, maybe possibly beginning to sound like something with an end. Joel Carver stared at the ceiling of the old weather station in the dark and tried to remember the last time a day had rearranged his understanding of something he'd been certain about. He couldn't. That he thought might mean something. He just didn't know what yet. The storm broke on the morning of the 3rd day, not gently. Storms on the Maine coast don't apologize. They simply stop the way an argument stops when one person walks out of the room. 1 hour the wind was still working the walls, and the next it was quiet enough that Joel could hear the propane heater's small blue flame. Cora was already awake when he opened his eyes. She was standing near the door, coat on, looking at the communicator in her hand. Her posture was back, the boardroom posture, the CEO posture, and Joel noticed it the way you notice a window closing. The last 2 days had peeled something back. This morning it was back in place, not entirely, but enough. Roads should be passable by noon, he said. I know, I got a weather update 20 minutes ago. She turned. The bruise above her eyebrow had gone deep purple overnight yellow at the edges. She'd done nothing to cover it. There's a town car meeting me at the Meridian Junction. 2 hours. I can drive you. You don't have to do that. I know I don't. She looked at him for a moment. Then, thank you. Yes. They broke down the shelter the way they'd run it efficiently without discussion, each taking a section without being assigned. Joel logged the supply usage on the maintenance clipboard and left it where he'd found it. Cora folded both blankets and stacked them squarely on the cots. Small things. But Joel noticed that she did them, that she didn't wait for him to handle it, didn't treat the space like a hotel she was checking out of. She left it ready for the next person who needed it. I didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. The drive out was slow ice over everything, the road surfaces treacherous in the way that looks safe until you're already sliding. Joel drove with both hands and didn't push it. Cora sat in the passenger seat with her phone active, working through what looked like 4 days of accumulated messages, her expression shifting through small, precise changes as she read. A tightening of the jaw. A breath held and released. Bad, he said, eyes on the road. Manageable. A pause. The board moved the facilities meeting up, 2 weeks now instead of 3. Joel absorbed that. Why? Because someone leaked that I was in Maine. Her voice was even but tight at the edges. And they want to move before I can finish building my case. He glanced at her. Can they do that? They can call the meeting. They can't force the vote. There are procedural requirements. But they can create enough pressure that... She stopped. Set the phone face down on her knee. Yes, they can probably do it. Joel turned his eyes back to the ice. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing useful to say, and he'd learned in the military that speaking into a problem you can't solve doesn't actually help the person sitting in it. So he drove, and Cora sat with her phone face down, and the frozen Maine coastline moved past them without comment. At the Meridian Junction, a black town car was waiting exactly where she'd said it would be. The driver got out, young, efficient, clearly relieved to see her, and Joel pulled up alongside and stopped. Cora didn't get out immediately. She sat for a moment, looking at the windshield. Then she turned and looked at Joel, the way she'd looked at the maintenance log at the hand-crank radio at Dale's name when he'd said it, like she was taking an inventory of something she didn't want to lose track of. If the vote goes wrong, she said, it won't be for lack of trying. I know. He meant it. I need you to know that's not... She stopped, tried again. I'm aware of what it sounds like. A woman from a company that's threatening your livelihood telling you she's on your side. I understand how that lands. It lands like the truth, Joel said. I'm not always wrong about people. Something in her face shifted. Not the composure that stayed, but underneath it, something that had been braced for a different answer released slightly. I'll be in touch, she said. You don't have my number. She held up her phone. I got it from the emergency communicator log this morning. He stared at her. I do my research, she said, and got out of the truck. He watched the town car pull away until it disappeared around the curve. Then he sat there in the quiet for a moment, just sat, hands still on the wheel, the heater running the road empty in both directions. Then he drove home to his daughter. Ellie hit him at the front door with the full-body momentum of a 7-year-old who'd been waiting 3 days to deploy it, and Joel caught her and held on longer than usual and said into her hair that he was fine. Everything was fine. He was home. She smelled like Helen's house, like cinnamon and old wood, and he stood in the doorway with the cold air at his back and his daughter in his arms, and felt for a moment like the world had the right proportions again. Helen gave him coffee and did not ask too many questions, which was why he trusted Helen. Life resumed. Joel went back to the yard. Ellie went back to school. The harbor town settled back into its January rhythms. The same tired negotiations between survival and weather that had been running in these communities for 200 years. But something had shifted in Joel in a way he couldn't articulate and wasn't sure he wanted to examine too closely. He found himself reading the news differently, following the Sterling Dynamics coverage with attention he hadn't had before, looking for the story inside the story. He found it on a Tuesday afternoon, 8 days after the storm. Howe was on a break at the yard, phone in hand, when he pulled up a business news article about the Sterling Dynamics board restructuring. Standard corporate coverage. The kind of article Joel would normally have skimmed for the local employment implications and closed. But he read this one all the way through, and then he read it again. Because buried in the 4th paragraph in the flat neutral language of financial journalism was a quote from a Sterling Dynamics board member, a man named Hargrove, listed as chair of the operations committee, that said, "The Rockport acquisition has always been structured as a transition. Our intention is to consolidate the facility's most productive assets into our existing Virginia operations effective Q2. Q2. That was April. That was 12 weeks away. Joel read it a third time, looking for the nuance. Looking for the part where this was the board's position and not Cora's. Looking for the quote from her that said something different. There wasn't one. There was no counterstatement. No, the CEO's office declined to comment, or Sterling Dynamics disputes the characterization. Nothing. Just Hargrove's quote, clean and uncontested, sitting in print like a fact. Joel put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. Howe was not a man who made decisions in anger. The Navy had taught him that, and grief had reinforced it, that acting fast on a feeling that hot usually meant acting wrong. So he worked the rest of his shift and drove home and fed Ellie dinner and helped her with a school project about weather patterns, which felt like the universe's idea of a joke. And then after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and read the article one more time. And then he called Dale. Dale picked up on the second ring. 63 years old, 31 years at the yard, and still answered his phone like he was expecting good news. "You see the Sterling piece," Joel said. A silence. The kind that meant yes. "I saw it," Dale said. "Hargrove's quote." "Yeah." "What are you thinking?" Dale was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm thinking I've got a meeting with my financial advisor next week, just to look at numbers." He said it with the particular flatness of a man who has spent his whole life doing the practical thing in response to bad news. "My wife wants to know if we can still afford the house if I'm not working." Joel pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. "It might not, Joel." Dale's voice was gentle. "It's all right. I appreciate it. But let's not do the thing where we pretend we don't see what we see." They talked for another few minutes. When he hung up, Joel sat at the kitchen table for a long time. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that resolved when he opened it into a name he recognized. "Sorry for the article." The quote was from Hargrove. "I found out an hour ago. I need you to know it doesn't represent my position. I know how thin that sounds right now." See, Joel stared at it. He typed back, "My colleague is calling his financial advisor. His wife wants to know if they can keep their house. Does that help you understand how thin it sounds?" He sent it before he'd finished deciding to. The read receipt appeared immediately. No response came. He didn't expect one. He put the phone face down on the table and went to bed. He didn't sleep well. The town meeting had been organized by a community group called Rockport Forward, a loose coalition of business owners, veterans' families, and local union reps who'd been watching the Sterling acquisition with the focused dread of people who understand exactly what's coming and can't stop it. They'd been trying to get a Sterling Dynamics representative to the meeting for 2 months. No one had agreed to come. Cora Sterling walked in 3 minutes after it started. Joel was already in the back row when she came through the doors. He saw her before she saw him, saw the room. See her, the collective intake of breath, the way conversations stopped in radius, like a stone dropping in water. She was in a dark coat, no corporate armor, hair pulled back simply. The bruise above her eye had faded to yellow-green. She looked like someone who'd made a decision on the drive over and was committed to whatever it cost. She didn't look for Joel. She walked to the front of the room and introduced herself to the woman running the meeting. Barbara Reyes, 61, whose husband had worked the yard for 27 years and asked if she could sit and listen. Barbara looked at her for a long moment, then pulled out a chair. Joel watched. The meeting was 2 hours long, and every minute of it landed on Cora Sterling with the cumulative weight of something that couldn't be managed, optimized, or reframed. A Navy veteran named Schultz talked about being medically discharged at 40, and the yard being the first place that looked at his service record as an asset instead of a complication. A woman named Maria talked about her husband working nights so her kids could stay in the school district. A man in his 50s, whose name Joel didn't catch, talked about his father who'd worked this same yard in the 70s, and how he'd taken this job because it felt like continuity, like being part of something that had roots. Cora didn't take notes. She didn't perform attention. She just sat and listened in the way Joel had seen her listen in the weather station, completely without agenda. And then Barbara Reyes looked directly at her and said, "Ms. Sterling, I'd like to ask you one question." The room went quiet. "Your board member, Mr. Hargrove, said the closure is effective Q2. Is that true, or isn't it?" Cora stood up. "I am actively fighting that decision. I have a counter-proposal before the board, and the vote is in 6 days. I cannot promise you the outcome. I can promise you that I have not conceded that fight." She paused. "I know what that's worth to you right now. I know it may not be much, but it is the truth." The room was not satisfied. The room was frightened and angry in equal measure, and frightened, angry people don't want truth, they want guarantees. Joel understood that. He'd felt it himself. And then someone in the third row said loudly, "Easy to say when it's not your house." And something in Joel moved him to his feet before he'd decided to stand. The room turned. People who knew him, Dale Barbara Schultz, registered surprise. Joel didn't address the room. He addressed Cora. "I want to ask you something," he said. His voice was level, not loud. "And I want an honest answer." Cora looked at him. She didn't flinch. "The night I pulled you off that cliff," Joel said, "you told me you'd been fighting the board for 6 months. You told me the Virginia closure was wrong. You said that like you meant it." He paused. "I believed you. I'm standing here right now partly because I believed you." A breath. "So I need to know, was that the truth? Or was that a woman who'd had a bad night and said what felt right in the moment?" The room was very still. Cora held his gaze across the crowded space. And when she spoke, she didn't speak to the room. She spoke to him. "It was the truth," she said. "It is the truth. And I know the difference between saying something because I mean it and saying something because it's easier to say." She paused. "You know that about me. Whatever else you're feeling right now, you know that." Joel stood there, and the thing was, she was right. He did know. He'd spent 63 hours in a concrete box watching her, and he'd gotten very good at reading the shape of her honesty. He'd seen what she looked like when she was managing a situation, and what she looked like when she was just telling him something true. They were different. This was the second one. He sat down. The room exhaled. Cora sat back down too, and the meeting continued, and Joel spent the rest of it staring at the water stain on the ceiling and trying to sort out what he was going to do with the fact that he was angry at her and believed her at the same time. Because both things were true. She hadn't lied to him. And Dale was still calling his financial advisor. And the vote was in 6 days, and she might lose it. And 300 families were sitting in the space between those two facts. After the meeting, Joel walked to his truck without stopping to talk. He needed air and distance, and the particular silence of being alone in a vehicle. He was 2 blocks away when his phone rang. He pulled over and answered. "I know," Cora said before he could speak. "I know it's not enough. I know the meeting tonight didn't fix anything. I know what 6 days means to people who can't wait 6 weeks." A pause. "I just need you to know that I walked into that room tonight because you told me about Dale, because I wanted to see the actual place." Her voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. "I walked in because you treated me like my decisions mattered, and I didn't want to prove you wrong." Joel sat in the dark with the engine running. "Don't prove me wrong," he said. A long silence. "I'm trying not to," she said. He drove home through the harbor, past the shipyard lights reflecting off the water, past the diner where Dale ate lunch every day, past the school where Ellie would walk in tomorrow morning, like the ground beneath it was permanent. He thought about what it meant to fight for something when you might lose. He thought about the 2 years he'd fought for Claire, and what it had cost, and what it had given him. He thought about Cora Sterling walking into that meeting alone. He drove home and sat in the driveway for 3 minutes before going inside. And he did not decide anything that night. But he stopped being certain that anger and trust couldn't exist in the same chest at the same time. Because apparently, they could. The board vote happened on a Thursday. Joel found out the result. The way the rest of the town did not from Cora. Not from a phone call, but from a 2-paragraph item on the Sterling Dynamics Investor Relations page that went up at 4:47 in the afternoon while he was still on the floor of the shipyard. A younger mechanic named Torres pulled it up on his phone and read it out loud to the break room, and the break room went quiet, in the specific way that rooms go quiet when the news is bad, but not surprising. The Virginia consolidation had passed, 8 votes to 3. Joel read the item himself when Torres handed him the phone. He read it twice the same way he'd read the Hargrove quote 3 weeks ago. Looking for the nuance. Looking for the part where it said something different from what it said. It didn't say something different. He handed the phone back, picked up his tools, finished the remaining 40 minutes of his shift with the focused attention of a man who needs his hands to be doing something while his mind works through something else. He did not call Cora. She called him at 7 that evening. He was at the kitchen table helping Ellie with multiplication tables when his phone lit up with her number. He looked at it for 1 full ring cycle. Then he told Ellie to keep working on the 6s and stepped into the hallway. "I lost," Cora said. No preamble, no setup, just that. "I know," Joel said. 8-3. Hargrove had 2 of the votes I thought were mine. A pause. "I miscalculated. I don't miscalculate often, and I did, and I'm sorry." Joel leaned against the hallway wall. In the kitchen, Ellie was saying the 6s out loud to herself. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 5 is 30. The small, earnest voice of a child, working through something hard. "What happens now?" he said. "Legally, the board controls the asset strategy. I'm still CEO, but the Rockport decision is made." Another pause. Longer. "Unless I override it." Joel went still. "Can you do that?" "Technically, the CEO has emergency intervention authority in cases of strategic misalignment. It's a clause that's never been used. My father put it in the charter as a safeguard, and the board has ignored it for 20 years because it's never come up." Her voice was precise, controlled, but Joel could hear the thing running underneath it. The thing that wasn't controlled. "If I invoke it, I buy 60 days. The board will immediately move to challenge my authority. It will be a legal fight. It will be ugly and public and expensive, and I will probably lose that too." A breath. "But I'd have 60 days to do something real." Joel said nothing for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Because you asked me not to prove you wrong." Her voice was quieter now. "And I'm trying to decide whether to do something that will likely end my career. And you are, for reasons I don't entirely understand, the person I want to talk to about it." In the kitchen, 6 times 8 is 48, 6 times 9 is 54. Joel closed his eyes. "What does doing something real mean in 60 days? If you get them, it means I go to the alternative investors I've been cultivating for 8 months. Private equity groups that are interested in defense manufacturing with a veteran workforce angle. There's a federal incentive structure that makes it genuinely profitable if it's structured right. I've been building the case. I have the numbers. I just don't have the time or the authority yet." Is it real, the profitability? It's real. It's not as clean as the Virginia option. Nothing is as clean as closing something and moving it. But it's real, and it's sustainable, and it keeps the yard running. A pause. "I need 60 days, and I need to still be CEO long enough to close the deal." Joel opened his eyes. "Then do it," he said. Silence on the other end. "It'll cost me everything I've built," she said. Not as objection. More like she needed to say it out loud to someone who would hear it accurately. "I know," Joel said. "Do it anyway." Another silence. Longer. Then, "Okay." She hung up. Joel stood in the hallway for a moment, then went back to the kitchen, sat down across from Ellie and said, "Where were we?" 6 times 9, Ellie said. "I keep getting it wrong." 54, Joel said. "And you'll get it wrong every time until you don't. That's how it works." Cora invoked the emergency authority clause on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the story was on 3 national business news outlets. By Friday evening, it was everywhere. The headline that ran most consistently was some variation of Sterling Dynamics, CEO defies board in stunning reversal on defense contract closure. The coverage was not kind to Cora. In the financial press, words like erratic and emotionally driven appeared with the specific frequency that Joel recognized as coordinated, the way coordinated things always looked slightly too uniform to be organic. Hargrove gave a statement calling her decision a breach of fiduciary responsibility and a troubling departure from the data-driven leadership Sterling Dynamics requires. Cora's statement was 4 sentences long. It said, "The Rockport Naval Shipyard employs 312 people, 61% of whom are veterans or active reserve members. The board's decision to consolidate in Virginia would eliminate the majority of these positions. I have invoked my authority under the corporate charter to pursue an alternative that preserves these jobs and remains economically viable. I will present that alternative within 60 days. 4 sentences. No corporate language. No spin." Joel read it standing at his truck in the shipyard parking lot at the end of his shift, and something in his chest did a complicated thing he didn't have a clean word for. He texted her, "Good statement." She wrote back 40 minutes later, "It's going to get worse before it gets better." He wrote, "Yeah, usually does." She sent back nothing, which he'd learned by now meant she was working. It did get worse. The board filed a legal challenge within 72 hours, moving to have the emergency authority clause declared invalid on a technical procedural ground. Hargrove began a quiet campaign with institutional shareholders. 2 board members who'd voted with Cora in the minority suddenly went silent, which in corporate politics meant they were being pressured. The town watched all of it with the specific, exhausted attention of people who've been the subject of other people's decisions too many times. And then the crane came down. It happened on a Wednesday morning, second week of February, 6 degrees above zero. The old harbor crane, a piece of equipment that had been flagged for structural inspection twice in the last year, and cleared both times by assessors who Joel had privately believed were optimistic, was in operation on the northern dock when the main support arm gave. Not a gradual failure. Sudden. The kind of structural failure that happens when metal fatigue reaches its limit, and the limit arrives without warning. 2 workers were on the dock beneath it. A rigger named Pete Saunders, 58, 20 years at the yard. And a younger man named Kevin Cho, 26, 8 months in, still in his probationary period. The arm didn't fall on them directly. If it had, the outcome would have been different. It came down at an angle, and hit the dock surface hard enough to buckle the planking, and a section of dock gave way, and Pete went through it into the water below, and Kevin was pinned under a collapsed section of the support structure, not crushed but trapped, unable to move. Joel was 40 yards away when it happened. He was running before the sound finished. The water between the dock pilings in February is 31 degrees. Pete Saunders had maybe 4 minutes before hypothermia made him unable to keep himself afloat. Joel hit the dock edge, assessed the angle, and went in without pausing. The cold was absolute. It didn't feel cold. It felt like pressure, like the water was pushing inward from every direction simultaneously. Joel found Pete in 10 seconds. The man was conscious, sputtering, fighting the instinct to panic that the cold activates in the human body, and got an arm around him, got his head up, and looked for the fastest extraction point. There was a maintenance ladder 12 feet down the dock wall. 12 feet was a long way in 31-degree water, towing a man who outweighed him by 30 pounds. Joel made it in one sustained effort that he would not remember clearly afterward. Just the burn of it, the way his arms stopped feeling like his arms and became something he was operating through willpower rather than sensation. He got Pete to the ladder. Pete got a hand on a rung and held. Joel climbed out first, then reached back and hauled Pete up after him with both hands, and they both hit the dock surface on their knees, gasping. Joel was back on his feet in 8 seconds. Kevin was still trapped. It took 4 men, Joel Torres, a veteran rigger named Smitty, and Dale, who showed up from somewhere and did not let his 63 years be relevant, 20 minutes to safely lift and brace the collapsed support section, enough to extract Kevin. The kid had a broken collarbone and a deep laceration on his left thigh that bled significantly and required the yard's emergency kit, and Joel's hands applying direct pressure for 11 minutes until the paramedics arrived. Kevin held Joel's eye the whole time. "You're okay," Joel told him probably 15 times. "You're okay. Hey, stay with me. Look at me." "I'm looking," Kevin said each time, pale and shaking and looking. When the ambulance pulled away, Joel was standing on the dock in wet clothes in 6-degree air, which was a situation that would have consequences later, but he wasn't thinking about that. He was watching Pete Saunders get loaded into a second ambulance stable hypothermic Lucky and feeling the adrenaline begin its long recession. He turned around. Cora was there. She was standing at the edge of the dock access, still in her car coat, and she had clearly arrived recently because she was still holding her phone in one hand, and her expression had the look of someone who had driven very fast from somewhere else. Her eyes went to Joel, to his soaked clothes, the blood on his hands from Kevin's wound, the way he was holding himself with the deliberate steadiness of someone managing cold and adrenaline simultaneously. She walked to him. "Are they alive?" she said. "Both of them. Pete's hypothermic. Kevin's got a broken collarbone and a laceration. They're both going to be fine." He paused. "Probably." Cora looked at him for a long moment. "You went in the water." "Pete was in the water." "Joel, it's 6 degrees. "I'm aware." She looked at his hands, at the blood, at the way he was visibly, if subtly, beginning to shake from the cold that his body had been too busy to register until now. She reached into her car coat pocket and produced, of all things, a wool scarf and held it out. He stared at it. "Take it," she said. He took it, wrapped it around his neck, which didn't solve the problem of being soaked in February, but was something. "You need to get inside," she said. "I need to talk to OSHA. The crane's been flagged twice. I have documentation. If we don't, Joel." She put her hand on his arm. Not gentle, not maternal, firm. The way you stop someone who is running on operational momentum past the point where their body can sustain it. "I have a team here. I invoked emergency authority over this facility 14 days ago, which means I have operational jurisdiction. I will handle the OSHA filing. I will get your documentation." She held his gaze. "Get inside and get dry before you go into shock." "That is not a suggestion." He looked at her. She looked back. And Joel Carver, who had not let anyone tell him what to do outside of a direct chain of command. In 6 years, decided for the second time since he'd known Cora Sterling to trust her judgment. "Fine," he said. "Thank you." He started toward the yard building, stopped, turned back. The crane had two flagged inspections, he said. 2022 and 2023. Both cleared by a company called Meridian Structural. You should look at who owns Meridian. Cora already had her phone up. I'm looking. He went inside. Howe was dry and in borrowed yard clothes, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee in the break room when Cora came through the door 40 minutes later. She sat down across from him without preamble. Meridian Structural is a subsidiary, she said, of a holding company with board connections I won't detail right now, but that I intend to detail very thoroughly in the next 72 hours. Her jaw was set. This was negligence, and it was allowed because the people who should have caught it had financial reasons not to look too hard. Joel said nothing. Pete Saunders, Cora said. Kevin Cho, tell me about them. Joel looked up from his coffee. Tell me about them, she said again. Not as an executive gathering data, as a person asking, so he did. He told her Pete had a daughter at the University of Maine, who he paid for by working overtime. He told her Kevin had taken this job because his father had served at this yard before him, and he'd wanted to be part of something with a lineage. He told her about the first time Kevin had helped him diagnose an engine fault, the way the kid's face had lit up when he found it, that specific joy of figuring something out with your hands. Cora listened. When he finished, she said, I'm going to fund their medical costs entirely, not through insurance directly, so there's no delay and no fight. She paused. And I'm going to be at the hospital tonight, not as Sterling Dynamics CEO, just as someone who was here today and wants to know they're okay. Joel looked at her. He'd seen her in a crumpled car over 60 feet of ocean. He'd seen her eat MREs on a concrete floor and read a maintenance log like it contained secrets. He'd seen her walk into a hostile town meeting alone and take 2 hours of fear and anger without flinching. He'd seen her invoke a legal authority that might end her career to buy 60 days for people she'd never met. And now he was watching her say she was going to the hospital tonight, just as someone who was there. Not a CEO making a strategic empathy gesture. Not a woman managing a PR crisis. Someone who had sat in a break room and heard about Kevin's face when he figured something out with his hands and could not now pretend that person was a line item. You've changed, Joel said. Cora looked at him. Have I? From the woman on that cliff? Yeah, she considered that. I think I've just... She stopped. Started more carefully. I think I had a very complete picture of what my responsibilities were. And then I spent 3 days in a concrete box with someone who has a completely different picture. And some of what he showed me. A pause. Some of it was right. And I couldn't unsee it after. Joel's coffee cup was empty. He looked at it. The 60 days, he said. Where are you with the alternative investors? 2 confirmed. Working on a 3rd. If I get the 3rd, the deal structure works and I can take it back to the board with enough financial credibility that the challenge fails. She pressed her hands flat on the table, the same gesture he'd made on the communicator 3 weeks ago when he was holding himself steady. It's close. It's very close. What do you need? She looked at him. What do you need? To close the 3rd investor. What's missing? They want workforce assurance. Evidence that the veteran hiring program is real and sustainable, and not a PR construct. They've heard too many ESG stories that didn't survive contact with operational reality. She met his eyes. They want to talk to someone who works there, who can speak to what it actually is, not a spokesperson, not a prepared statement. Joel sat with that. When, he said. Next week. I can set it up for whatever time works around your shift. He nodded once. Set it up. Something in Cora's face shifted. Again, not the composure. The thing underneath. The thing that was braced and then wasn't. You don't have to do that, she said. After everything, you don't owe me anything. I know I don't. He stood, put his cup in the sink, turned back. I'm not doing it for you. She looked at him. I'm doing it for Pete Saunders, he said. And Kevin Cho, and Dale. He picked up his borrowed jacket. And about 300 other reasons. He walked out of the break room back toward the dock where his tools were still where he'd left them before everything went sideways. Behind him, he heard Cora pull out her phone. He heard her say to whoever answered, "Set up the call with Northgate Capital, next Tuesday, and I need a room with decent signal in Rockport, Maine." He didn't turn around. But he walked a little differently than he had this morning. Like the ground beneath him was slightly more solid than it had been when he'd arrived. The call with Northgate Capital happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the back office of a hardware store on Main Street, the only room in Rockport with reliable Wi-Fi and enough quiet that Joel wouldn't have to shout over machinery. Cora had set it up. Joel had shown up in his work clothes because he hadn't had time to go home and change between his morning shift and the 2 o'clock call, and because somewhere in the back of his mind he thought showing up in work clothes was probably more honest than showing up in anything else. There were 3 men on the other end of the video call. Suits, good ones, the kind that cost more than Joel's monthly mortgage. They introduced themselves with the efficient brevity of men whose time was calibrated by the hour. The one in the center, Northgate's managing partner. A man named Garrett looked at Joel for a moment before saying anything, the way people look when they're deciding whether someone is what they were told they were. "Mr. Carver," Garrett said, "Ms. Sterling tells us you've been at the Rockport yard for 6 years. That's right. And you served before that. 2 deployments, Navy mechanical, 8 years total." Garrett nodded. "We've seen the workforce analysis. 61% veterans or reserve. We want to understand what that actually means on the ground, not the number, what it means." Joel looked at the screen. He thought about what Cora had said, that they'd heard too many ESG stories that didn't survive contact with operational reality. He thought about Dale. He thought about Kevin Cho's face on that dock, pale and steady, saying, "I'm looking," every time Joel told him to look. He didn't prepare a speech, he just told them the truth. He told them what it meant to hire a man who'd spent 8 years following orders, in conditions that would break most people, and give him a job where his discipline and his precision and his ability to stay calm under pressure was an asset instead of an awkwardness. He told them about the culture that builds when a workforce is substantially made up of people who've already proven they can be trusted with something that matters. He told them about the informal mentoring. The way veterans at the yard didn't have to be asked to bring younger workers along because that was just how they'd been trained to operate. You didn't leave people behind, you brought them up. He told them about Pete Saunders in the water, about Kevin on the dock, about the way 4 men had worked that collapsed support structure without a single redundant word because they all knew what needed doing and they trusted each other to do their part. He didn't tell them it would be profitable. That was Cora's job. He told them it was real. That was his. When he finished, Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you think would happen to this workforce if the yard closed?" Joel looked at him steadily. "Most of them won't find equivalent work. Not in Maine, not in this economy, not at their age." A pause. "Some of them will be okay. Young guys like Kevin, they'll land somewhere. But the men in their 50s, their 60s men, who gave the first half of their lives to this country and the second half to this yard, they'll spend whatever years they've got left trying to figure out how to keep the heat on." He stopped. "I'm not saying that to pull on anything. I'm saying it because you asked what would happen, and that's what would happen." Another silence. Then Garrett said, "Thank you, Mr. Carver. That's what we needed to hear." Joel drove back to the yard and finished the last 2 hours of his shift. Cora called at 9 that night. He was on the couch with Ellie asleep against his shoulder, the TV on low, some nature documentary neither of them had been watching. "Northgate is in," she said. Her voice was different. The control was still there. It was always there, but underneath it, something had released. The way a cable sounds different when tension leaves it. All 3 investors confirmed. "The deal structure holds. I'm taking it to the board Thursday." Joel didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the top of Ellie's head. Her hair was coming out of her braid. She'd been complaining about the braid since dinner, but had fallen asleep before she'd gotten around to taking it out. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday. And Joel." A pause. "What you said in that call. Garrett told me afterward, it was the most honest thing he'd heard in a year of due diligence meetings. Another pause. I believe him. I just told him the truth. I know. That's what I mean. He was quiet for a moment. What are the odds Thursday? Better than they were last week. Hargrove still has votes, but the deal structure changes the math. If I can demonstrate viable profitability, 3 of his block will move. She paused. I think I can demonstrate it. You think or you know? A beat. I know the numbers. I can't know the people. She said it simply, like an honest accounting of her own limits. That's still the part I can't fully calculate. That's the part that matters most, Joel said. I know that now. A pause. I know that because of you. I didn't respond to that directly. He looked at Ellie's hair coming out of its braid and thought about all the things you can't calculate. Grief and loyalty, and the particular courage of people who keep showing up in a place that has given them no particular reason to. Call me Thursday, he said. I will. She did. The board voted on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room in Boston that Joel would never see, surrounded by people he would never meet, about a shipyard he'd given 6 years of his life to. He was on the floor at the yard when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He finished the bolt he was torquing 16 foot-pounds, the same as it had always been, and then set down the wrench and looked at his phone. One message from Cora. 3 words. We got it. Joel stood there in the noise of the yard with his hand around his phone and felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too small a word for something with this much weight behind it. More like the feeling of a load you've been carrying so long you forgot it was weight finally setting it down. He texted back. Good. She sent back. Is that all you've got? He almost smiled. Typed, I'm at work. She sent fair. He put the phone in his pocket and picked up his wrench. Dale appeared at his elbow 11 minutes later, which meant the news had traveled the yard in 11 minutes, which was about right. You here? Dale said. Yeah. Dale stood there for a moment with his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor with the expression of a man who is feeling something large and has decided not to make a production of it. Well, he said finally. Yeah, Joel said. Dale nodded, clapped him once on the shoulder, and went back to work. That was all. It was enough. The months that followed moved the way. Good months move, not fast, not slow, but with the feeling of things going in the right direction, which was its own kind of momentum. Northgate Capital closed their investment in late March. Cora's restructuring plan went into implementation in April, and the details of it became real in ways that the proposal hadn't quite captured. New equipment for 2 of the main bays. A veteran hiring initiative that brought in 14 new workers from the regional VA transition program, a skills training partnership with the community college that Kevin Cho Collarbone, healed back at work, signed up for in the first week. The scholarships were announced in May. 12 of them full rides to Maine Maritime Academy for children of shipyard workers. Ellie at 7 was many years from college, but Joel got a letter explaining the program and read it at the kitchen table twice the way he read things that mattered. Dale did not retire. He accepted a senior mentorship role in the new training program, which paid him slightly less than his previous rate and gave him slightly more authority over how things were done. And he told Joel it was the best professional decision he'd ever made, which Joel believed completely. Pete Saunders came back to work in April, physically cleared, carrying himself the way men carry themselves after they've been in cold water and come out the other side carefully, with a new awareness of the inches between one outcome and another. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't need to. And Cora was in Rockport, more than she was in Boston, which the financial press found confusing, and her board found irritating, and the town found gradually quietly unremarkable. She'd kept the 3-room apartment she'd rented above the harbor bookshop during the 60-day fight, and she kept it after, and she was in it often enough that Mrs. Pelletier from the bookshop learned how she took her coffee and had it ready when she heard footsteps on the stairs above. She came to the yard. Not with a clipboard, not with an assessment team. She came the way Joel had described coming to the yard himself on the days when he needed somewhere to put his energy. She walked the floor and asked questions and listened to the answers. She learned the difference between the work the new equipment changed and the work that would always be done by hand and judgment. She asked Dale once about the HVAC system in the main bay and spent 40 minutes hearing about it, and Joel, watching from across the floor, thought she gave the maintenance log the same attention. The board remained difficult. Hargrove did not concede gracefully. He filed 2 procedural challenges in April that went nowhere, and a shareholder resolution in May that failed by a narrow margin. Cora handled each one with the flat, precise efficiency of someone who'd been underestimated professionally for long enough that she'd built her whole strategy around it. She didn't talk to Joel about the board fights much. When he asked once how she was holding up, she said, "I've had worse weeks," and then told him about a cargo route in the Pacific in the year before she'd taken over Sterling Dynamics, when the ship's refrigeration system failed 3 days out, and the crew had to reorganize the entire manifest to save the cargo, and how she'd learned that the most useful thing in a crisis was not to have a better plan, but to be the person who didn't panic while everyone else was figuring out theirs. Joel had listened to that and thought about the night on the cliff, and how still she'd been in the tilting car, and how she'd said Cora when he'd called her Ms. Sterling, like getting the name right mattered even then. He thought about it, but he didn't say it. Some things you hold for a while before you give them words. The school event was a spring concert, second week of June, the kind of all-grades affair that ran 40 minutes long and involved 17 children in handmade costumes, representing the water cycle, which Joel attended because Ellie was playing a cloud and had strong feelings about the integrity of her costume. Cora came because Ellie had asked her to. That was the whole reason. Ellie had seen her at the yard 2 weeks earlier. Cora had been there for an equipment walkthrough, and Ellie had come with Joel for the last hour after school. And Ellie, with the direct social confidence of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned that adults sometimes needed to be approached carefully, had simply said, "My concert is on the 14th. You should come." And Cora, who had several meetings on the 14th, had said, "I'll be there," before she'd fully processed it. She was there. Second row in from the left, still in the coat she'd driven up from Boston in. Joel sat beside her. They watched 17 children perform the water cycle with varying degrees of commitment to their roles. Ellie among them taking the cloud position with complete seriousness, and Joel kept his eyes front, but was aware in the particular way he'd become aware of things in the last several months of Cora beside him, the way she was present, the way she watched Ellie with the focused attention she gave everything that deserved it. During the applause at the end, Ellie spotted them from the stage and lit up with the specific incandescence of a child who has confirmed that the people she wanted present are present. She made her way through the crowd after still in the cloud costume, white fabric trailing, and arrived in front of them, slightly out of breath. "Did you see the part where I moved my arms?" she demanded of both of them equally. "I saw it," Joel said. "Very realistic cloud behavior. It's called convection," Ellie said with authority. "My teacher taught us." "She's right," Cora said. "That's exactly what it's called." Ellie beamed at her, satisfied at the confirmation, and then, with the unconscious ease of a child who decides she trusts someone and simply acts on it, slipped her hand into Cora's. Cora looked down at the small hand in hers. Something crossed her face. Not the composure, not the thing underneath it. Something below all of that. Something that had been waiting a long time to be reached. "So," Ellie said, looking up at her with the absolute directness that 7-year-olds reserve for questions that matter, "are you coming home with us now?" The gym was still loud around them, parents and children and teachers moving through the after-show chaos. But in the small space where the three of them stood, everything went very quiet. Joel looked at Cora. Cora looked at Ellie. And then Cora looked at Joel, and he looked back at her, and it was the same look they'd exchanged in a concrete room during a January storm, when neither of them had known the other for more than a few hours, and yet something had already recognized something. The way veterans recognize each other. The way people who've carried weight recognize the posture of someone else carrying it. "Yes," Cora said, quietly, to Ellie and to the question beneath the question. "I think so." Ellie accepted this with the satisfaction of someone whose logistics have been resolved and turned to her father. "Can we get pizza?" Joel exhaled. The exhale of a man who has been holding something for a long time and is now carefully putting it down. "Yeah," he said. "We can get pizza." They walked out of the school into a June evening in Rockport, Maine, the kind of evening this town produced in early summer, like an apology for January. Warm and long-lit, the harbor visible at the end of the main road, the ships moving slowly against the orange water. The shipyard was running 3 shifts. Joel could see the lights from the northern dock, the crane that had replaced the old one, the movement of small figures against the lit machinery. Dale was probably still there. There he kept supervisor's hours now, which meant he left when the work was done and not before. Ellie walked between them, holding Cora's hand on one side and reaching up to take Joel's on the other, connecting them through herself, with the practical authority of a child who has decided how things should be and arranged them accordingly. Joel thought about the night he'd pulled Cora off that cliff. The tow rope around his waist. The ledge cracking under the weight of something that hadn't been meant to be held. The moment when he'd gotten them both on solid ground and just breathed. I thought about what it cost to choose the harder thing. Not the heroic choice, not the easy one, the harder one. Cora invoking a legal clause that had never been used. Walking into a room full of frightened and angry people. Telling a board of 12 men that she was going to do what was right, even if it cost her what she'd built. I thought about what Claire used to say, that the people worth knowing were the ones who were still choosing kindness after life had given them every reason to stop. He didn't know yet what Cora was to him, or what he was to her, or how you name something that grew out of 60 hours in a concrete room and 3 months of the most unlikely partnership either of them had ever been part of. He suspected the naming would take time, and that the time would be all right. He knew that she had sat in a board meeting in Boston and thought about Dale's face when he'd talked about the yard, and that it had changed her vote. He knew that she had stood on that dock in February and watched him walk out of the water and looked at him like something had been confirmed that she'd needed confirmed. He knew that his daughter was holding both their hands and asking about pizza, and that the harbor was lit, and the ships were running, and the yard was full, and the town was still here. That was enough to know. For now, it was more than enough. The harbor glowed at the end of the street, and the 3 of them walked toward it in the long June light. A man who had spent 6 years surviving a woman who had spent her whole life proving something, and a 7-year-old in a cloud costume who had simply decided that what was needed here was for everyone to hold on. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not power, not money, not the right words at the right time. Just someone who still reaches out a hand after the storm, after the grief, after every reason not to, and holds on, and doesn't let go.